Okay, welcome again, everyone. This week's Parsha is Parshat Rabbi, and we are going to learn just one or two verses, the very end of the Parsha. The very, very end of the Parsha. For anyone who wants to follow, it's the 16th chapter, the 16th verse. 16 and 17. So I just want to mention, though, that the opening of the parsha is Re'eh Anochi Noten Lifnechem Hayom Bracha Uklala. Look, see, I am putting before you today a blessing and a curse. And this is a theme that's repeated throughout the book of Deuteronomy. This idea that we have a choice, that God puts before us a blessing and a curse. Well, different words are reward and punishment. And it all depends on what our choices are. Later in the book, after repeating this theme over and over again, it will say, Ubecharta b'chaim. Choose life. But what I want to point out is that the first word of the parsha and the name of the parsha is Re'eh, see. Now we're going to see the connection immediately with the two psukim that we're going to be learning, the two verses. So I'll read it in Hebrew and then we will translate it. So it says, Shalosh pa'amim b'shana, 3 times in the year, Yera'eh, that's the key word here, Yera'eh, kol zechurcha et pnei Hashem Elokecha, b'makom asher yivchar. It will translate up to there. So 3 times a year, Yera'eh, you shall be seen, all of your males, the face of God, your God. B'makom asher yivchar, in the place that God will choose. B'chag hamatzot, u'b'chag hashavuot, u'b'chag hasukot. Below yera'eh et pnei Hashem rekam. When are these 3 times of the year? The holiday of matzot, which we call Pesach. Ubechag Shavuot, Ubechag Sukkot, and Sukkot. And you will not be seen by the face of God empty-handed. In other words, you should not come empty-handed to the temple. You should come with offerings. Ish kamatnat yado, each person with the gifts of his hand, kebirkat Hashem Elokecha asher natan lach, the blessing that God has given to you. So those are the 2 verses we're going to be looking in today. And you'll see that the word Yera'eh, you will be seen by God, appears twice. Now, there is in the Torah something called a kri and a ketiv, where a word is written in one way, but it's read in a different way, either with different vowels, or sometimes with even the letters, the way we pronounce it will be as if the letters have changed. And this is what's called Torah Misinai, Torah Mimoshe Misinai, a Torah, the oral Torah that was given over to Moses at Mount Sinai. And therefore, in the Torah, it's written in a certain way, but we have an oral tradition that we read it differently. So when we read the Torah publicly, we read it according to the oral tradition of how we should read it. Now, in this week's Parsha, we have something very, very unique in these two verses. Because here we do not have a kativ and a kri. Kativ and kri means the way it's written, kativ, kotev, the way it's written. Ukri is the way we kore, the way we read it or call it. So here, the word yera'eh, we don't have a kativ and a kri. Yet, the sages say that this word, which we translate as you will be seen by God, the exact same letters and the same vowels can be understood that you will see God. So here, again, this is from the rabbis that are pointing out that the same way it's written and the same way that it's pronounced, it depends how you want to translate it. So the simple understanding of the verse is that we should come up to the temple so that we will be seen by God. But again, the rabbis come and say, not that that's not true, it is true. But at the same time, yera'eh also can mean that you will see God. So we can see that this is actually a very deep concept. It's not one or the other. There is like a dual experience here where we're coming up to the temple in order that God sees that we're doing the mitzvah, and we are coming to the temple and God sees us. Now, the obvious question is, God sees everything all the time. So what does it mean that that you will be seen by God when you come up to the temple? God sees you, a person everywhere. So that's one question. And then the question is, what does it mean if the sages are telling us that you could read it, that you shall see God? So to answer that, that's what we really want to talk about tonight. So the idea is, and actually for those people who are going to be with us in another 2 weeks, that is going to be the subject of what we're talking about, is that there are certain times and there's certain places where, as it were, we're seen by God more than in other places, and that we can see godliness in more than other places or more than other times. So the two examples, one is the temple. The temple was a vortex. All of Jerusalem is a vortex of energy. It's drawing down energy into a very particular place. It's concentrated energy. And so therefore, this whole idea of coming up to the temple 3 times a year is for this dual purpose, that we will be seen by God in this particular place because there's something very special about this place. And in time, it's any time of day in potential is holy, can be special, that we can open up our hearts and pray to God. But anyone who's been at the kotel, at the wall, which was actually a retaining wall of the temple, knows the power of the place. And the same thing with Shabbat, that in potential, any time can be holy. Any time can be a special time to connect to God. But anyone who has kept Shabbat knows there's something special about Shabbat. There's something special about a holiday. So this is how we can understand on a we'll call it a simple level, but a deep level, that there are places and there are times where our being seen by God is more auspicious, is more potent. And there's times where we can connect to God in a more auspicious and potent way. So that is just trying to understand why the sages come and say, even though it's not an oral tradition handed down from Moses from Sinai, but nonetheless, in this particular word, they're pointing out that it's like a two-way street here. It's that God sees us and we see godliness. So then we come up with a very obvious question. What does it mean to see God? What are the sages trying to tell us? Now, why do I ask it? Because in the Torah itself, God says, no one can see my face and live. And that's why when God revealed the 13 midot rachamim, the 13 aspects of compassion, so God, as it were, hid Moshe in the cleft of the rock. And however we understand that, God put his hand in front of Moshe so he couldn't see the face of God. He said, you can't see my face, you can see my behind. And this is understood that we can understand many, many things retroactively that we can't understand at the moment. That's one of the understandings of seeing the face of God, is to understand the full ramifications of everything that happens to us. All the reasons why everyone goes through what they go through. But we're not capable of that kind of comprehension. And that's what God says. No one can see my face and live. And yet in this pasuk, it says explicitly that you will be seen by the face of God and you will see the face of God. So one of the ways that the Talmud solves this, well, can we see the face of God? In another place, it says God spoke to Moshe face to face. So we have this contradiction. Can we see God's face or can we not? So the understanding is, no, we can't see God's face. We can't see God's essence. We can't know every reason for everything that happens in this world, at least right now. So the Talmud says, what does it mean that God spoke to Moshe face to face? So it gives over this teaching that when a teacher and student are learning together, the only way that the learning is really transferred properly is when each one displays a good face to the other. In other words, if one is in a bad mood, or one is angry in general, or angry at the student, or angry at the teacher, so the teaching is not going to be transmitted in a good, proper, positive way. So the Talmud explains, what does it mean when God says in the Torah that he spoke to Moshe face to face? Moshe is the Talmid, he's the student. And so God shone a good face to Moshe when he was teaching him the Torah. It doesn't mean he actually, as it were, saw God's face. First of all, God doesn't have a face. There are no physical attributes that we can associate with God. But the face means like the full revelation. And we're just not capable. We're human beings. We're finite human beings. And there's only so close that we can get. The promise that all the prophets gave is at the time of Mashiach, the revelation of God will far surpass what we've experienced up to now. And the knowledge of God will cover the earth like the waters cover the sea. That it will be a whole different level of consciousness that we can taste a little bit now, and we can experience a little bit now. But the full revelation will not be revealed until the time of Mashiach, the Techiyat HaMeitim, the resurrection, and the world to come. So we're going to point out something else very, very important here, is this word Yera'eh, whether we're translating as you shall be seen by God or you shall see God, the exact same letters are the letters of the word Yirah, which is the fear or awe of God. Now, this is very, very connected to what these two verses are talking about, because when we came up to the temple, by all accounts, the experience of being in the temple, first and second, even though in the second temple we're told that the presence of the Shekhinah was not there like in the first temple. But nonetheless, we're told that in both temples, the experience of being in the temple was an awesome spiritual experience. And the way we can understand that is by going to the Kotel, by going to what's called the Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall was not even part of the temple. It was the wall of it was a retaining wall where the Temple Mount sat. This is the Kotel, and the Temple Mount is up here, and then the temple is up here. This is just a retaining wall. So if anyone's been to the Kotel, it doesn't happen to everyone, and it doesn't happen every time. But if someone goes to the Kotel a few times, most likely they've had like a very, very powerful experience. There's an incredible energy here. But that's talking about a retaining wall. That's not even talking about being in the temple, especially the first temple that had the presence of the Shekhinah. But by all accounts, the whole experience of being in the physical temple was a kind of a spiritual experience that was full of awe. Yira many times is translated as fear, but that word is so loaded with negativity, fear. That's not the meaning of yira in Hebrew. Yira really means awe and an incredible respect and understanding of our place in the world vis-a-vis an infinite creator. That's what Yira. And we talk about Yirat Shamayim, the fear of heaven. But that fear it touches on fear because there are consequences for our actions. The Torah is full of consequences for our actions. The word punishment is not a correct word when trying to understand the beginning of the parsha. Look, see, I'm putting before you a blessing and a curse. But the blessing is if you listen to God and you do the commandments and you're a good person. And so many of the mitzvahs are about being a good person. So that is, the reward comes from that. The blessing comes from that. And the curse comes from not listening to God. So any parent also know when trying to educate children, it looks like reward and punishment, the carrot and the stick. But so many times it's based on the choices that the child is going to make. If the child listens and does all the right things, it's just natural that a blessing will come. But if a child acts out and doesn't listen and rebels and all of that, well, there are consequences that go with that from those actions. So the important thing here is we have this word yira'eh, shall be seen and shall see. But it's very connected to the experience that these verses are talking about, is being in the temple. And can you imagine a more awesome experience than feeling that you're being seen by God? Now, of course, in a sense, we should have that all the time, because God is looking at us all the time. And if we really thought about it, we should be in a state of awe all the time, because God knows everything that we're thinking and saying and doing. But also that when we look at the world, in a sense, we can connect to godliness. We can connect to the godliness in creation. So this brings us to another point. And that point is when we have the duality of you shall be seen and you shall see. So we can draw an important conclusion. Everyone has heard this many times, but it's so true. The way we look at the world is the way that the world looks back at us. In other words, if we look at the world through pessimistic eyes, through negative eyes, through anger or a whole host of negative attributes, well, that's the mita keneged mita. That's the measure of measure that the world is going to reflect, mirror back to us our experiences. And we know the opposite, that when we look at the world, even looking at the world is a parable, because the way we look at the world is a reflection of our inner world. But if our inner world is optimistic, is joyous, is hopeful, wants to get along with the world, wants to get along with people, looking for opportunities to do good. So that is the energy that's going to come back to us. There's a famous teaching from the Baal Shem Tov. In the Psalm, Esa Einai Elaharim, I lift up my eyes to the heavens. So it says, one second. Excuse me, not that psalm. The psalm where David says that God is my shadow on a person's right hand. So the simple understanding is that God is protecting us. God is our tzel. Hashem silcha al yad yaminecha. God is your shadow, your protector on your right hand. The Baal Shem Tov read it differently. He read it like this: God is your shadow on your right hand. And he explains what is a shadow. If I raise my hand, the shadow raises its hand. If I start dancing, the shadow starts dancing. If I bow down, the shadow bows down. In other words, the way that we act towards God, the way we act towards the world, to other people, that is our shadow. That is what's going to come back to us. So that is implicit in this idea of you will be seen by God and you will see God. In other words, the way we approach life is the way that it will come back to us. So I want to add one thing here, and we'll just go into physics and quantum physics just for a minute, because in Sefer Yetzirah, it talks about three types of dimensions. Olam, Shana, Nefesh. Olam means world, which means space. The three dimensions of space. Shana means year, which means time. There's one dimension of time. And the last one is called Nefesh, soul, or consciousness. And we asked, well, where is that dimension? Where is the dimension of soul or consciousness? So I invite anyone to Google the role of consciousness in quantum physics today. And you'll see that in physics, the role of consciousness is like the cutting edge of where physics is going. Because through physics, and especially quantum physics, they have observed that an observer is not a neutral figure in reality. When reality is being observed by either human consciousness or even machines, as soon as, we'll call it reality, is being observed, it actually becomes part of the equation, and it has an effect on the reality. So when we said before, the way a person looks at the world is the way that the world is going to mirror back. So basically science confirms this. And they're really on the cutting edge of understanding soul, nefesh, like Sefer Yetzirah said, as a dimension. This is a fascinating subject. I again invite anyone just to do a little bit of Googling. A lot of the terminology is very scientific, but you pick up that our observation of the world affects the world. And not just affects the world, but it affects the way we experience what we're observing. So this is all implied in this one word, Yera'eh. So I will end with a blessing. First of all, we should merit to have the third temple, and we'll be able to experience this type of Yirat Shemayim, this type of awesome experience. But it is available in our world now, in space and in time. That's why a Beit Knesset is a special energy. Yerushalayim has a special energy. All of Eretz Yisrael has a special energy. And of course, in time, Shabbat and the holidays have a special ambiance that is conducive to being seen by God and seeing God. So God willing, we will all be able to contemplate these ideas and to try to put them into practice and experience them on many different levels.